Welcome to the MR2 Technology Leadership Podcast, the show where we dive deep into the minds of today's top technology leaders to inspire the innovators of tomorrow. I'm your host, James Gambill. Whether you're an aspiring engineer, a future CTO, or just passionate about the impact of technology, this is your backstage pass to the stories and strategies shaping the future. On today's episode, we have John, or as we'd like to call him, Father John. And as always, I hope you enjoyed the conversation. Tell me, how did you fall into the world of information technology, like your career from where you started? What made you want to get into technology as a whole, and currently to where your position is today?
So I'm a little bit older. I started in technology back in aerospace in the 80s in Southern California. And after a stint there for maybe 8 years or whatever, I came across where I'm at now, Kingston Technology. And first 5 years I ran their customer service and tech support. And then the last 27 years have been responsible for IT operations, everything except app development.
Okay. And when you started in aerospace, what made you go to that career?
Well, I was, I have a background in electronic engineering. I was always, I always had an interest in electronics. I always, I had a Commodore 64, like most of the young kids back in the day, or had a VIC-20. I had a Timex Sinclair, which I still have today, which is probably almost 50 years old. So I've been involved with tech way back when it was first coming out and affordable, at least for consumers. And I haven't really slowed down. I start transitioning more from the tech side to being more the management side of things. So you're less tech, but you're still involved in managing tech. So I think my stronger suit was in the management and leadership of it, more so than it was in the technical in the trench side.
Why do you think that is? Do you feel some of the whatever skills maybe you're not interested in kind of reinventing and keeping up with all the different skills of what it is today? Or
I'll be honest with you. I think the driving force behind that was working in these environments and working in environments basically that weren't configured or managed properly to create an environment where a technical person could flourish. So you say, well, how does one change that? Well, you have to be in management to make those changes. So I think when I weighed out what's the greater good of what I could provide and what I think my ultimate interest would be, it was in the management side of it. By doing that, then I was able to change the environments to let myself as well as other people that wanted to grow in the technical field become more of a contributor, take away some of the restrictions that they had, and ultimately led them to be good technologists. The downside to walking into environments where you're sitting there and going like, wow, I can't, my hands are tied here, but I don't have the authority to make those changes. For the last 27 years in IT, all I've been doing is making environments awesome for subordinates that report to me, their subordinates, understanding and getting a better understanding what kind of environment will make people be a better technologist, a better administrator, better manager. And I think I saw that early on that I was the one and a lot of people didn't want to have the energy or the gumption to want to do it. They would just complain about it. I said, well, instead of complaining about it, I want to do something about it. And I think
absolutely.
that's something I've done for the last 32 years in Kingston. And I haven't slowed down, you know, a bit. I see my contemporaries start putting their feet up on their desk or let things, lie as they are. But I'm not that guy. I get irritated. And we were just talking about a attention deficit disorder.
Mhm.
Just always looking for making things better in our environment, still having the stamina and the energy to be like that. And as long as I'm still in charge of being able to control that, I feel I can bring value. The minute I get handcuffed is what I think I might have to call it a day.
So paving the way. I do like that. What would you say for because I know there's probably a ton of people in kind of the scenario that you described where either they're in a position, they don't really have much authority to make changes, either bad leadership or the business itself maybe is not true tech forward. So knowing they want to make a change, but having that kind of roadblock, I guess what advice would you give to them to kind of either get out of that or even kind of what you did, kind of moved up the food chain a little bit in order to make a difference?
I think, obviously the first thing is maybe you want to impress your management that you can make a difference. And I would start, for instance, I'll share a story. We had a lab environment, right? And I walked into this lab environment. If you can imagine, it's just, it's a couple of offices that merged together with lab desks in it and whatnot, but everything's everywhere. There's no organization. There's a pizza box from a year ago still sitting in the floor, that kind of environment. And I said, I can't work in this environment. So I found an open cubicle next to mine and I created my new lab. And it was put away every night. Everything was meticulous about it, cleaned up. And then everyone said, and then I had people wanting to work in my little cubicle lab because they didn't want to go. And I said, no, no, this is mine. And then I said, "Look, I'll take over that lab," and told my manager, I said, "I'll take it over, but I want to run it, meaning I want to police it." And I said, "If anything's there after 5 p.m. on any of these tables, it'll all be in the garbage. But I don't care who it is and what." So they let me do that, and I took it from this mess into this pristine environment that people could actually work in and do good. And of course, someone would leave their pencil on the desk or notebook, and it went right in the trash.
Oh, wow.
And I set that standard, and I think that while there be people that were aggravated by it, I think management saw that, hey, this is what you have to do to make this, this environment sustain. And then that just led on to the next thing and the next thing. You set these little examples, management hopefully picks up on it. And relative to your contemporaries, they will then more than likely probably offer you a position to be a supervisor. And that's how you start your way. But if you set that gold standard, and for me, it wasn't too hard. I found that people typically are lazy and they do the minimum. I think if from office space, do the minimum so they don't get fired, right? That's the tagline.
Yep.
But every once in a while, you run across someone who's passionate about what they do, and in comparison to everybody else, it's a blind manager would be able to see it. And I think that the good ones will tend to promote that. And that's why, you promote a better, environment. And even the naysayers who would look at you and say, "I've been here longer," and whatever, I think they start enjoying the fact that it's a better environment, and they come along as it were. And, I think that's been a lot of my experience here and in through other aspects of my life.
That's awesome. What would you say your biggest accomplishments are in your field?
I would probably say, Kingston was a run and gun company, shoot from the hip. Everything's done in the back of a cocktail napkin. And Kingston grew so fast, just like anything that's a startup. And when I was asked to come over into IT, Kingston had been around about, I think, 8 years. So that 8 years of, you know, basically flying by the seat of their pants. And I came into the IT environment that was there. Now the joke here is, had I known back then what I know now, I probably would never have taken the job.
Really? Okay.
And I can laugh about it now, but I can tell you the scars and the bruises and the bumps and the impact to your brand when you step into an environment that needs a lot of care and feeding is a life changing experience, mentally, physically. But when it cleared, it was the biggest accomplishment that I ever had because I had to do it all by myself, not knowing anything. And the only thing I had in my corner was the fact that I wanted to make things better. And I know that it matters now because the folks that come into the environment today are coming into a gold standard. They have weekends off. They're not getting phone calls at 3 in the morning. Everything runs like a Rolex watch. And that started, 27 years ago when I first came here till now. But I would say that would just my initial exposure to IT and everything I've been able to do to get it to where it's at.
So was Kingston, is that the only technology outside? I know you said aerospace, but was Kingston the first kind of IT position you held?
Yes.
Or okay. And so you literally started from the ground.
Now, bear in mind, I was always a computer guy. I did some stuff to help some smaller businesses. This is back in the days of Novell,
Sure.
DOS, things like that. So I had a technical background. I didn't have an IT background.
Okay.
And that came. out of a fire hose. I made a lot of wrong decisions, and I'm hopefully making a lot better ones as a result of that. But I had a good team of people that are, Kingston seems to hire the nicest people, the most caring people. I had management that let me do what I needed to do to make things better. And like I said, it's a challenging world here because IT keeps evolving. I think that's the reason why I don't leave, because whether stay here or go somewhere else, I'm still gonna have the same IT challenges. And IT itself is morphing enough where it's a challenging field to be in, period. So there was no reason to ever change that, because anything I built with the team here, IT was changing. I have to change that too. When it's gone from on-prem to public cloud, and of course all the security concerns that you never had 25 years ago that you have every day today. Lots of roles changing, a lot of concerns that were important yesterday and not the concerns of today. So it keeps you on your toes, and I think that that's what keeps the job exciting. And in this role, or in this, in an IT world, there's or I should say, there's positions that they have that kind of challenge. We have people that want to be fed that live in, and want to have those challenges in their life to be a better practitioner. And there's other people who are just, happy with X amount. And by the way, there's roles in our environment for people who only want to do X amount. So
Yep.
you get a good balance of people, a good balance of challenges, and I've been able to police that to this point pretty well.
That's great. So from your experience on stuff in Kingston, so you've seen a lot of things, either the certain trends either come and go, I'm sure. Where do you see in the next 2 to 3 years, like what's the biggest or the next big thing as far as technology wise? But I will say a caveat, you cannot say AI. So outside from AI, what do you see the next 2 or 3 years look like?
Anyone who knows me knows they can't say those letters anymore. They're absolutely meaningless to me. But I'll tell you, the future that I see IT myself is, I see that it's a field that's going to be deprecated to a utilities type of environment. And I'll explain that. When you get a computer science degree or you go into IT the first time, there's so many things you can do: telecom, you can do service desk, you can do data center, you can do compliance, blah, 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 blah. With the advent of SaaS, I see all that changing and all going away. I think that the folks, the traditional IT people that you have at a company, will just be people who basically are security practitioners, and folks that maybe do integration between SaaS platforms. I think that everything is moving away from custom apps to SaaS platforms. We used to have 40 racks in our server. We have 4 racks now. It's going that direction. And in the situations where you'd be picking, say you're picking a new HR system, right? In the old days, you'd have 8 IT people and 2 HR people. Today, you have 8 HR people and half of an IT person that they will kidnap and take out of your group.
Yep.
And they will run their own world. They will not even involve IT for anything. And I see that kind of pattern happening as these different departments who traditionally had to wait months or years for an application to be developed, just going and buying their new CRM, their new marketing solution, their new project management platform, and trying to do the best. What they do bad at is maybe the contract negotiation, maybe the how they secure it from a identity perspective. That's been the one thing we've noticed at Kingston. But at the end of the day, they run the application. They run it well because they have an interest in the application helping their business, whatever their particular discipline is. That I think that's the thing that's changing IT, where all these apps are going to be all disappearing, and the only thing that's going to be in public cloud would be the SaaS providers. If that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it totally does. It's funny, or two-letter word that we don't mention anymore, with everything kind of being cloud. I see worlds of, I always kind of paint this picture and everything kind of went cloud the last 10 years. It was a big move to the cloud. And I was a pretty early adopter back early days of Azure and AWS when they kind of came on. And I had that relatively quick move to the cloud. And I see a lot of people now going the reverse route where they're taking a lot of things off the cloud and kind of going back like on-prem. But I also do see like the SaaS model that you explained and everything going to that type of model. If I was, kind of like a young buck, getting into the world of IT, and I have no idea what I want to do, because as you mentioned before, there's a vast amount of different paths that you can take, especially if you're going through schooling, whether it be like a network engineer, infrastructure, security, what have you, development, anything. Well, what advice would you have for that one person who's like, I want to get into IT, I just don't know where to start?
Yeah, I think there's two distinct routes. Well, there's three. There's the compliance is the legal aspect of what we do is huge. Every state's going to have their own governance. Every country's going to have their own governance. So compliance is always going to be probably the biggest ancillary effort to IT. So that's one area, but that's not a fun area. That's if you're like the lawyer types or people who like to do research or do a lot of the documentation side of IT, that's one. But traditional IT, which was always been development and operations, and the development side, I think there's a ton of stuff. If you're a developer, you'll be developing for Salesforce, developing for JDA, developing for all these things. That path will always be there, and you'll always need them because the two-letter word hasn't displaced developers.
Yep.
As people that are individual contributors, they help IT, but it's still the brain power behind it and the creation of that code and content still has to be quarterbacked by development. And the operations side speaks to the scenario I mentioned where less and less of it's in the data center. That's the marker that you look at. It's like, well, what was in my phone closet 10 years ago? What does it look like today? It's getting empty.
Oh, it's
Why it's
night and
being
day. Yeah.
And when you look at it like that, you're kind of like, okay, so if all of it's going away, what is my career path? And I can tell you, the only career path you have, in my, from my perspective, is going to be in security.
Mm.
So, and that security could be security for any of the business processes that we have. It could be, internal risk, external risk. It could be email security, but it's all going to be a police state. And obviously, even today, we still have police departments around for a reason. It's because it's never going to get better. And in the threat landscape, it'll never get better. As IT keeps expanding into OT, into other areas of what our life consists of. And I think that they're still going to need great security practitioners for that role. It's funny, I was talking to someone who's going into the Coast Guard, and they have a lot of different opportunities you can sign up for. But the one that's got the biggest backlog in terms of getting in line for the schooling is cybersecurity.
Oh, wow.
I mean, you could be a airplane command boat mechanic tomorrow. You can get into other aspects, the armed forces. Cyber's where they need to hire people, and everyone wants to go there. So that tells you something about what's happening, from the military side of things. And the commercial side of things, and I was just telling some of this. If you look at it, there's like 4 storage vendors out there. There's 4 compute vendors and probably 4 networking vendors.
Mhm.
And you have 6,000 security vendors. 6,000.
That's very true. I never thought of it that way. Yeah, absolutely
When
true.
you look at the scale, when you look at where all the money's going, when you look for all of VC money, equity type efforts, bootstrap events, anything like that, it is all security. I can tell you the last event I was invited to that talked about anything related to compute, storage, or network, which is the heart of a data center. It's all about this new product to protect your browser, this new product to protect cloud, this new product to protect identity. And when you have hundreds of vendors trying to do the same thing, and the breadth of that product set in our environment is 40 different products. We have 6 people managing 40 different products. How deep into each of those products do you think one person can be?
Yeah.
So if I tell you we have 40% efficacy across the board as an average, I'm probably not too far from the truth. They have just the bandwidth enough to turn it on and say a prayer that it works. They never dive into the product and never review it, the activity of what's happening, just because they don't have the bandwidth. And that's the challenge today that I don't see it going. You don't see consolidation, you see expansion. and it's not slowed down. The biggest shows in the world in IT are RSA and Black Hat. And it's because that's where all the money's at today. Trade show wise, marketing wise, that is where all the money is. And if you have one little idea, and I know several founders that came up with one tiny idea that no one apparently everyone missed, and he stood it up and he just sold to a a bigger company that's acquired him. That whole process took about 3 years.
Oh, wow.
And that's you're talking about a mature world of IT, and this person finds it. Everyone is looking for the next little thing to monetize, either as a service or as a product, and there's not enough people to police all that activity. And then, of course, if you don't do it, then you expose yourself. Now it becomes a risk game. How much insurance do I want to buy to protect my world? If you have 40 products, you can kind of guess how much money we're probably paying, and it's not a little.
Oh, yeah.
That's where I think if you say that's if I'm going to school. By the way, 20 years, I'm not gonna say 20, 10 years ago, there was no academia was not involved with security. It was all computer science degree and everything like that. I think I'm gonna say 10, maybe 11 years ago, Purdue University, we had an intern for Purdue, was actually taking a cybersecurity bachelor's degree curriculum. And that was the first thing I ever heard of. Of course, today every university has that direction. But that wasn't the case so many years ago. But I saw that was happening. That would have to happen.
Yeah.
And sure enough, it flourished into the environment. I mean, you can't even go to school to talk about 40 different types of security defenses that we need to worry about. But they give in the fundamentals, which still includes the data center, still includes you got to know the building blocks of IT to know how to defend it. But at the end of the day, if you're looking to have a 25-year career, you're looking at security.
Yeah, I agree. That's actually it's the role that I kind of transitioned to. Well, actually, it looked like the most fun, to be honest. Like from being like back in the day and like messing around with my father's Commodore 64. Shout out when you mentioned that, and learning a lot of those commands and messing around with that and breaking it a good amount of times to try to fix it before he figures out before I get a whooping. That to me, like kind of tickled my fancy for the most part. And you mentioned as far as money, yeah, dude, there is so much money in security. One of the last conferences not even a conference, it was just an outing. They had like Laker tickets. And it happened to be the one Laker game where LeBron James broke the record. And it just happened to be they had IT event for security at that game. I don't think anybody talked once about security. It was mostly like, do you think it's going to break the record or not? And kind of about that. But just the amount of money that I know it costs for that one game, it's crazy.
Timing.
Yeah. Yeah. And timing. Yeah. Absolutely. Well, one thing to ask you with the time that you have at Kingston and everything like that, is there any, and with all the different experience of the ups and downs and everything and that, was there anything that you would do differently from the path where you took to where you are today?
You know, you do something, that's the joke I have. If someone comes and questions me about something that being done right, I go, well, how did I manage to be here for 30 some years? If you don't know what you're doing after X amount of years, you shouldn't be in the role. That's logic would dictate that. I think in some cases I would in my earlier part of my career, I should have used more imagination. So a lot of times in IT, you're just kind of this firefighting mode. We're just trying to get what's running, and you're not kind of saying what's the end state of this environment or what I'm doing, and should I be looking out that way, and how far, and how much of an effort, and I think that's just as a general thing is looking beyond the tip of my nose and say where are things going to be? How should I start planning? And I would tell you this, and this is another big thing for people in IT, I made it, part of what I do, and I have maybe a reputation, and Ron can maybe speak to that, is that if you're involved in any type of the procurement side of anything, which is a big chunk of what I do,
Mhm.
and you wanna own procurement because you don't want a procurement department picking the vendors, the technology you have to work with. It is literally the worst scenario that could be. You have to have credibility, and you can't be challenged by a finance. So you really have to know, you have fiduciary responsibility for a big spend. IT is a cost center, not a profit center. And so you get the scrutiny of why millions of dollars need to go into it, and it's not generating a dollar. And it's really just, in some cases, dealing with risk, or a necessary evil to have a business in this world. But knowing how the whole world of managed services, product and purchasing and deal registration and spiffs and when to buy and when not to buy and how to go about having a competitive environment for vendors and understanding, how you can be taken and really understanding the other side of the table, we call the dark side, how the dark side operates, so to speak, but then also engaging with them. And I did a podcast on salespeople and why you should befriend salespeople, not run away from them. And it had a lot to do with you can learn so much about a particular product, about that person, about where they came from, their life experiences. Every sales meeting I take, I walk away a little smarter because I learned what that guy worked at before he was at. And he tells me the history of what's been happening there. And it helps me become more informed when I have to make decisions about things. It helps you understand pricing from other products he may have sold in the past. So when I have these meetings, they think they're having a meeting with me. I'm having a meeting with them. And it's a lot different when it's like that. And obviously, I also have interest in what they're selling, but I make it a 50-50 split. They learn something about me, but I learn something about them. And you have to not stick your head in the sand when it comes to this part of the business, because I have a lot of people that say, well, how do you know you got a good deal? He goes, well, I sent my requirements out to 3 vendors and I got the lowest bid and I went with the lowest bid. I said, so that tells you got the best deal you can get?
Mm.
So far away from it. And that education from a dollar perspective, and obviously we get management that becomes a point of contention, is huge. And that's where, if you do a good job of that, you can almost, like I have, paid my salary just in good deal making.
Got it. That's a good outlook.
And then when I say that, you may laugh, but I've paid my salary many times over by crossing a different T or dotting a different I.
Yeah, not a lot of people talk about the dollars and cents.
And by the way, here's the perspective from the guy who doesn't care. He goes, it's not my money.
Right.
And if you have that attitude, then you're gonna be the worst, the worst person to put in charge of how you conduct spend. When you think of it like your money, and I honestly think about it still today. When it's a 5-digit deal, I'm very involved. There's guys who have to do 5 digits of rounding error for them. They don't even care. But I'm that detailed, and you get it almost to develop a reputation for being hard to work with. And hard to work with just means I want to get a good deal. I want a fair deal.
Exactly.
Some people think, yeah, they didn't just blindly buy what I was telling them and call me a bad guy for that. I go, well, just because I'm not like the rest of your customers doesn't mean I'm a bad guy. It means I'm doing my job. That was one area that caught on a little later in my career that I wish I would have exercised sooner, to the point that I mentioned. The things that you do for cost optimization, for checking contracts, to renegotiating, to looking for legalese that can get you out of a bad situation. That whole business side of it is huge. And if the dollar amounts in there are enough to basically fund an IT effort that was never budgeted, cover your salary, pay for another admin salary. It's a whole story just itself on the business side.
Yeah, and that's a different game all entirely. And a lot of people look at when they get into IT just from a technical perspective, as far as like, oh, what can I do and what languages to learn. Not very many people talk about the business side of it and the contract negotiations, or just kind of vetting out different vendors as far as what better deals and possibility you can get and features and stuff. And like, it never hurts to ask too. A lot of people just take it for what it is, that whatever they're offering, and just say, okay, cool, sign the deal. And instead of either negotiating a little bit, because what's the worst that can happen? They just say no, and then okay, on to the next type of thing. Yeah, that's great. That's a good perspective. Well, John, we're getting up on time here. I appreciate the time learning about you and taking the opportunity to have this conversation with you. I appreciate it, my friend.
I appreciate you sharing. Thanks for the questions. And if there's anything else I can do to help the cause, let me know.
Much appreciated.
Cheers. You're good.
Take care.